continue to be much more concerned when it comes to our security with the prospect of a nuclear weapon going off in Manhattan.
Power outages in San Francisco, New York, Frankfort, Kentucky, and Los Angeles. Coincidence, or were they part of the drill known as Operation Gotham Shield that will finally commence between April 24th and April 26th? Basically, a simulation drill, and not the actual detonation of nuclear weapons, will be underway. SHTF plan writes, during this exercise, 4 nuclear devices, 2 of which are rendered safe during the U.S. Department of Defense Vital Archer exercise, and 1 successful 10-kiloton detonation in the New York City, New Jersey area, along with 1 smaller detonation on the U.S.-Canadian border, are to take place. Among the organizations involved are the U.S. Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Defense, U.S. Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, the FBI, FEMA, Northcom, State of New Jersey Office of Emergency Management, the State of New York Office of Emergency Management, and the City of New York Office of Emergency Management. Of course, when an undertaking of this magnitude occurs, caution dictates that we are again reminded of the outcome of previous government agency drills held days before and sometimes the day of that mirror actual world-changing tragedies.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attack.
You are actually working today on an exercise that envisioned virtually this scenario.
Almost precisely. I was up until 2 o'clock this morning because it's our job. My own company, Advisor Consultants, we specialize in helping people to get their crisis management response.
Witness number 1 approached an ATF agent nearby. He claims he asked the agent what had happened, and witness number 1 says this is what the agent told him.
He started getting a little bit nervous. He tried reaching somebody on a 2-way radio. Couldn't get anybody, and I told him I wanted an answer right then. He said they were in debriefing. None of the agents had been in there. They had been tipped by their pagers not to come into work that day. Plain as day out of his mouth.
Oklahoma City paramedic Tiffany Bible, who heroically responded just minutes after the blast on April 19, 1995, swore in an affidavit that when she arrived, the BATF was in full mop gear, bomb gear that takes at least 30 minutes to put on. When she asked them, oh my goodness, were you guys hurt inside the blast? They said, no, we got tipped off by our pagers not to come in today.
It's true. Drills are held all of the time. However, adding to the concern is the occultic nature of Operation Gotham Shield. The term Gotham, an old Anglo-Saxon word meaning goat's town, and a nickname for New York City coined by legendary American writer Washington Irving, and later becoming the realm of Batman, has significant free Masonic influence, linking it to the 33rd degree worship of Baphomet.
All are worthy. You can say that again.
That is Bruce Wayne's grandfather, Mrs. Cooper?
His great-grandfather.
I understand he was tapped for Skull and Bones.
Tapped for it? Sir, he founded Skull and Bones.
This ceremony at Ground Zero, preceding the unwelcome construction of the memorial that would be blatantly named the Oculus, could very well be a clear Masonic reference to Aleister Crowley's Thelemic Third Eon known as the Age of Horus. According to Crowley, Horus is gradually growing from the idealism of 20th century chaos, i.e. communism, fascism, etc., into an age of human enlightenment. Yet, who has adopted this concept of the coming of the Antichrist as their own? None other than the puppet masters of the elite shadow government and their new world order.
In my line of work, you got to keep repeating things over and over and over again for the truth to sink in, to kind of catapult the propaganda.
The UK could decide to use its nuclear weapons in a first strike if London deems it necessary. That's according to UK Defence Secretary Michael Fallon.
Quite belligerent comments there from the UK's Defence Secretary Michael Fallon. He said that in the most extreme circumstances, we've made it clear that you can't rule out the use of nuclear weapons as a first strike and didn't specify who the potential targets were, saying that if he said that, it would make the deterrent less credible. But in the past, we've heard from the Prime Minister Theresa May, who has pointed to one country which she feels represents a threat to the UK.
There is the threat from existing nuclear states like Russia. We know that President Putin is upgrading his nuclear forces. In the last 2 years, there has been a disturbing increase in both Russian rhetoric about the use of nuclear weapons and the frequency of snap nuclear exercises.
That mantra there of a Russian threat to NATO is something that's been repeated many times over. The Russians point to the fact that it's NATO which has expanded its presence more and more towards Russia's borders since the end of the Cold War. In June last year, before that speech by Theresa May, NATO carried out its largest war games since the fall of the Berlin Wall, pointing many in Moscow to fear NATO's intentions.
A nuclear-powered US submarine has arrived in South Korea amid growing concerns that Pyongyang will mark the anniversary of its military's foundation with a new missile or nuclear test. It's the latest show of US military might. A day earlier, a US aircraft carrier strike group conducted exercises with 2 Japanese warships near the Korean peninsula. North Korea's closest ally, China, has called for restraint from all sides. But US President Donald Trump says the UN Security Council must take further action to finally solve the crisis.
The status quo in North Korea is also unacceptable, and the Council must be prepared to impose additional and stronger sanctions on North Korean nuclear and ballistic missile programs. This is a real threat to the world, whether we want to talk about it or not. North Korea is a big world problem, and it's a problem we have to finally solve. People have put blindfolds on for decades, and now it's time to solve the problem.
The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations says the U.S. is not going to let North Korea use the American citizen it detained last week as a bargaining chip. Speaking on CBS this morning on Monday, Nikki Haley warned Pyongyang that it's not going to work. She said the U.S. will not engage in bilateral talks with the regime until it shows it is acting in good faith by halting its weapons tests.
South Korea's Yonhap news agency, citing a government source, says the DPRK has carried out its largest ever firing drill on the 85th anniversary of the foundation of its army. Tuesday's drill, reported to have been overseen by leader Kim Jong-un, was conducted around the port city of Wonsan. A central work report meeting has also been held in Pyongyang on Monday to mark the anniversary. The Minister of the People's Armed Forces, General Park Yon-sik, reaffirmed Pyongyang's resolve to respond to any proactive actions. He says, while addressing the meeting, that the DPRK is fully prepared to launch nuclear attacks anytime. The defense minister also blamed the U.S. for escalating tensions.
Nuclear shelter sales have reportedly spiked in Japan as the world community condemns North Korea's ballistic missile and nuclear ambitions. Reuters reports a Kobe-based company has already received 8 orders in April alone. That's already more than the 6 orders it typically gets in an entire year. The company director tells Reuters, quote, "It takes time and money to build a shelter, but all we hear these days is that they want one now." Construction of a nuclear shelter runs about 25 million yen, which is more than $250,000 US. The Sea of Japan is all that separates the country from the Korean peninsula. As test launches continue, several North Korean missiles have landed in waters within Japan's exclusive economic zone. The United Nations Security Council condemned North Korea's latest attempt at a launch. On April 20th, members said the illegal activities are, quote, greatly increasing tensions in the region and beyond.
U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis arrived in Kabul today as the country descended further into chaos. Worsening the situation, new allegations the Russians are supplying the Taliban with weapons.
We are going to have to confront Russia where what they're doing is contrary to international law.
His top general, John Nicholson, made it more clear.
Should it be clear you're not refuting that they're sending weapons to the Taliban?
Oh, no, I'm not refuting that.
The visit comes after a sneak attack by the Taliban on an Afghan military base in Mazar-e Sharif that killed at least 140 Afghan soldiers. Military vehicles drove Taliban fighters dressed in Afghan army uniforms past checkpoints and into the base. Survivors said the militants then opened fire on unarmed Afghan soldiers returning from a mosque. Mattis called the attack barbaric. The Taliban also claimed responsibility for another attack today at Camp Chapman, a base that houses CIA and U.S. Special Operations Forces. In 2009, 7 CIA officers were killed here in a suicide bomb attack. There are no American casualties this time. The Taliban now control about 40% of the country. The U.S. sent 300 Marines to Helmand Province this month, and General Nicholson has said he may need a few thousand more troops. Despite a resurgent Taliban, the U.S. military targeted ISIS militants 2 weeks ago, dropping a 22,000-pound bomb on a network of caves and tunnels near the border with Pakistan.
The U.S. Foreign Policy Chief Federico Mogherini says that the bloc's anti-Russia sanctions will remain in place. Mogherini made the comments on her first official visit to Moscow as the EU's top diplomat. She said the bloc wants better ties with Russia but cannot ignore what she called Russia's annexation of Crimea. Mogherini was speaking at a press conference with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The Russian diplomat, on his part, questioned the rationale behind the sanctions, suggesting that Kiev deserves such punitive measures more than Moscow for its unwillingness to hold dialogue. The meeting comes one day after an American paramedic with a conflict monitoring group was killed in a landmine explosion in eastern Ukraine. Kiev and Russia have been trading blame ever since. Western countries accuse Russia of involvement in the conflict in eastern Ukraine, a charge that Moscow denies.
In honor of Yom HaShoah, Israel's Holocaust Memorial Day, United States President Donald Trump delivered a speech to the World Jewish Congress Assembly in New York condemning anti-Semitism and prejudices. In his speech, delivered via video link, the president referred to the Shoah as, quote, the darkest chapter of human history. Trump continued by saying, quote, we must defeat terrorism and we must not ignore the threats of a regime that talks openly of Israel's destruction. We cannot let that ever even be thought of, end quote. This was a not-so-subtle reference to the Iranian regime, which actively backs armed groups dedicated to Israel's destruction. Iranian leaders have often made incendiary remarks against the Jewish state, with the leader going so far as to say that Israel should be wiped off the map. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has long claimed that Iran's nuclear program causes a significant threat to the Jewish state's existence, and last January, on International Holocaust Memorial Day, he claimed that the Iranian regime poses the greatest danger to Israel.
As part of the 2015 international deal to freeze Iran's nuclear program, Iran and the U.S. agreed to sort of a prisoner swap. The U.S. would get 4 Iranian Americans imprisoned by Tehran, and the U.S. freed 7 Iranians in exchange, which then President Obama characterized like this.
These individuals were not charged with terrorism or any violent offenses. They're civilians, and their release is a one-time gesture to Iran, given the unique opportunity offered by this moment and the larger circumstances at play.
But a new report in Politico says that was far from the whole story, and that several of the freed Iranians were deemed national security threats. The Justice Department also abandoned efforts to catch 14 more fugitives, at least one of whom was strongly linked to Iran's nuclear program.
3 brand new F-35 Adil stealth fighter planes have just been delivered to Israel today. They're in addition to the other 2 delivered in December, making the Jewish state the first and only country in the world to possess the aircraft outside of the United States. The fleet is proudly adorned with the Star of David emblem of the Israel Air Force. Even though they were assembled by Lockheed Martin in the States, they all contain critical components from several prestigious Israeli companies. Each one costs about $100 million, and by the year 2022, Israel will have at least 50. These, quote, ultimate stealth fighter jets will provide the Jewish state with complete air superiority in the region for the next 2 decades. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel's goal is to obtain supremacy in every theater, in the air and sea, as well as on the ground and in the cyber world. The Israeli public will catch their first glimpses of the F-35's debut as part of the annual Independence Day flyover over the country on May 1st. But you better look fast, because these jets practically soar through the skies at the speed of light.
So, what's been going on while I've been gone?
After taking a post-presidential vacation, former President Obama is ready to get back in the public eye. He started by hosting a panel of young activists and leaders at the University of Chicago to talk about the challenge of getting young people politically active.
The single most important thing I can do is to help in any way I can prepare the next generation of leadership to take up the baton.
Obama has already hinted that he wants to work with young people in the future. It's part of the mission statement on his new foundation's website, and it's a slight divergence from his immediate predecessors. George W. Bush largely withdrew from public activism after he left office, while Bill Clinton focused more on philanthropy. Coming up on Obama's agenda, accepting an award from the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library, and a meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel.
Look, I've seen, Obama backing Monsieur Macron, Mrs. Merkel backing Macron, the European Commission in Brussels, who was supposed to be neutral, backing Monsieur Macron.
Je voterai donc en faveur d'Emmanuel Macron.
J'appelle donc à battre le plus fortement et le plus puissamment possible le Front National, à battre l'extrême droite en votant pour Emmanuel Macron.
Et le 7 mai, je voterai pour Emmanuel Macron et je vous invite à faire de même pour la République et pour la France.
France's socialist president François Hollande has urged voters to back centrist presidential candidate Emmanuel Macron to keep Marine Le Pen from gaining power. Hollande said the National Front leader wanted to pull France out of the euro, which would wreck the economy.
Je tiens d'abord à remercier les Françaises et les Français. L'extrême droite.
The extreme right would partly stigmatise our fellow citizens with regard to their origins and their religion. It would call into question the freedoms and the principles which are the foundation of the Republic. This is why mobilisation is necessary, but also in the clarity of the choices. I will vote for Emmanuel Macron.
Pour ma part, je voterai Emmanuel Macron.
French presidential candidate Marine Le Pen has announced that she's temporarily stepping aside as leader of her National Front party. The announcement came just a day after the far-right candidate reached the May 7th runoff, where she will face centrist Emmanuel Macron.
I've always considered that the President of the Republic is the President of all French people, and in this function he needs to gather all the French. It is a deep conviction, but now it's the moment to move from words to action, and it is the reason why it seemed essential to me to take leave from the presidency of the Front National. Tonight, I'm no longer the president of the National Front. I'm the presidential candidate, a candidate that wishes to unite all French people behind a project of hope and security.
In a TV interview, Le Pen said that she was confident that she would become the next French president.
Police used tear gas on demonstrators in Caracas. At least 3 people were reportedly killed in Venezuela on Monday as anti-government protests continued. They take the death toll to more than 24 in a month of unrest that's seen politically motivated shootings and daily clashes. There are also mass sit-ins on Monday. Those taking part calling for early elections, the release of jailed activists and autonomy for the opposition-led Congress. The socialist government of President Nicolas Maduro, seen here playing baseball at the weekend, accuses critics of seeking a violent coup. The opposition says he's a dictator, repressing peaceful protest.
I want them dead. Kung ibigay sa akin yan ng buhay. Yung mga terrorists na they cut other people's throat, slit it and just to decapitate it. They are animals. But if you want me to be an animal, sanay rin ako dyan. Pareho lang tayo. I mean, I can dish out more than what you can, 50 times over. no quarters given, no quarters asked for these people. And there will be no trouble tomorrow, I assure you, not even a single fight.
Chile has been rocked by a major earthquake, but there are no reports of any deaths or serious damage. With a magnitude of 7.1, the quake struck on Monday off the west coast, around 35 kilometers from Valparaiso. It briefly caused alarm along the Pacific coastline and rocked the capital, Santiago. There were some evacuations, but a tsunami warning was cancelled. Everything was falling, she says. The television was falling. A painting was falling. Several aftershocks were felt, including in Santiago. The effects of the powerful quake were tempered because it was offshore.
The Carolinas and several other mid-Atlantic states are preparing for a round of strong thunderstorms carrying the threat of flash flooding. The storm system that left hundreds of roads flooded in eastern Tennessee over the weekend is slowly moving northeast, leaving nearly 6 million people under flash flood watches and warnings. According to CNN meteorologist Michael Guy, a high risk of flash flooding is threatening Charleston, South Carolina to Fayetteville, North Carolina, where residents could see as much as 6 to 10 inches of rainfall through Tuesday morning. Over the weekend, storms carrying about 2 to 4 inches of rain resulted in flash floods in areas parched from drought in Tennessee and southwestern Virginia.
Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi will test the world's first anti-malaria vaccine in areas where access to healthcare is limited. It is called RTS-S, and it's produced by British drug maker after 30 years of development. Clinic trials have been successful, but it's not yet known how effective the drug will be. That's why the World Health Organization will run pilots in the poorest parts of the world. The 3 countries already run intensive programs to tackle malaria, but still have high number of cases. The pilot will involve more than 750,000 children aged between 5 and 17 months.
Is marijuana a religion? Apparently it is in Denver. The International Church of Cannabis recently opened its doors, despite some pushback by a public official. Following no clear-cut dogma, the church describes itself as a place for those who, quote, ritually take the sacred flower to find inspiration and meaning.
It's really just meditating and finding yourself. It's kind of having your own mind and believing and going with it.
Since the church opened on 4/20, worshipers have been allowed to smoke inside the building, but only during private invitation-only events. The city axed the church's original plans to allow the public to take part. But Dan Pabon, a Democratic state representative, wants to go further. He accused the church of leveraging usage laws and tried to push an amendment that would make it illegal to smoke in churches. Ultimately, members of both parties blocked Pabon's amendment, saying it restricted freedom of religion. One of the church's founders accused Pabon of religious persecution, arguing people in Denver can already smoke anywhere. But
later this year, risk takers may get a chance to drive the first flying car called the Kitty Hawk Flyer. It's an all-electric vehicle made by Kitty Hawk, a startup backed by Google co-founder Larry Page. Kitty Hawk released a video Monday showcasing the invention. The Kitty Hawk Flyer carries 1 person, rises to 15 feet, and is powered by 8 battery-backed propellers. Weighing only 220 pounds, it is approved to fly in uncongested areas under the U.S. Federal Aviation Authority. Interested parties can pay $100 to receive a $2,000 discount when the flyer goes on sale later in 2017.
We can now safely throw out one theory about how the Bermuda Triangle sinks ships. The theory is that an undersea release of methane gas can pull a ship underwater. And physicist and author of the book, Storm in a Teacup, Helen Chersky says that is definitely wrong. The theory suggests that bubbles cause the ship to sink and rock and could capsize a boat. But Chersky says the bubbles actually make boats rise. And every boat is built with airtight compartments to prevent it from tilting too much from one side or the other. And according to Bermuda Attractions, over 1,000 ships and planes have disappeared as far back as 5 centuries ago. So while theoretically the methane theory is possible, according to Chersky, there is no way it's the cause of the mystery disappearances over the Bermuda Triangle.
A storm in California put animal rescuers to the test when they were called about a stray dog that had just given birth outside. The situation was so worrisome, the organization drove 3.5 hours to save them. Hiding in the bushes was the protective mother and her newborn puppies.
Good mama. Good girl.
Once Hope for Paws, a rescue organization, gained her confidence, they removed her babies from the hiding space.
Good girl. Can I take a puppy? Can I take one of them? You can trust me.
One by one, the new mom nervously watched as each puppy was taken away.
Here. Okay, kisses? Good girl.
Finally, the mother joined them.
Oh, Mama is coming.
Hope for Paws transported the dogs to a vet's office for safety. There, the storm had knocked the power out, so the crew worked by flashlight to reunite the family. 6 weeks later, the 5 girls and 3 boys were all named after weather elements and are enjoying sunshine when they can, proving after a storm comes a rainbow.